presentation with the example of overbooking. This presentation connects to the previous presentation about the break-even point. Therefore, there won't be an extensive description of what business optimization is. The focus on overbooking is pretty straightforward. What we want to accomplish is a basic understanding why overbooking is a good idea for airlines and why the airlines are making a lot of money with this. But in terms of business optimization, we want to understand how an airline optimizes their models towards minimizing the risks or mitigating the risks that are involved in overbooking. Obviously, an overbooked airline experience can be very disturbing for customers, and you might have been in this situation yourself, that at an airport, at the check-in gate, the airline suddenly announces that for anyone who gives up their seat, a certain award is put in place. And you might have also experienced that the closer the airline gets to its departure time, the more urgent this giving up seats gets and the higher the rewards are. The rewards can be cash, can be vouchers, can be overnight stays, bumping to business class on the next flight and so forth. And in many cases, even with the payout of substantial rewards for giving up seats, even that reward, even though the airline has to pay for that, even with that, the overbooking of a plane is still highly profitable. What we want to understand is what overbooking is, how it works, and then maybe have a look at a couple of mathematical examples of doing so. First of all, overbooking as a part of business optimization, which means to optimize profits and costs and to mitigate risks, and to use models, mathematical models, to simulate or to understand how the reality would, how these changes would impact reality for decision makers is kind of given with this. So we need models. So we need to understand models instead of playing with reality, and the models have to be as accurate as possible, mathematically accurate as possible. And you can see that this is one of those examples. There's many more examples in business optimization, and this is one that is often used and very simple or easy to understand. So what we really want to go what we really want to understand here is overbooking as a optimization in a business space that has limited capacity. So this can happen with rented cars, this can happen with hotel beds, this can happen obviously with airlines where it's very common. This can happen with even with wedding parties, nightclubs, concert venues and so forth. So anywhere where there is a limited capacity and where we're assuming in our model that not everybody will show up, so that there's individuals that will just not show up even though they paid the ticket or the hotel price, so that the hotel or the business itself, basically, they can keep the money because there has been no cancellation. Hence, based on the cancellation policy, the business can keep the money, but the room or the airline seat remains free. So the clever thought in terms of business optimization is, okay, we'll take the money from the person that did not show up and did not cancel because legally they don't have to get it back. So we'll keep that money, but we have this suddenly available resource, so why not make double money? Why not find another person that would sit in there? But obviously, we don't know if people show up or not. So it's a game of guessing or basically a game of probability to guess, will they show up or will they not show up? So let's overbook the plane so that for those that don't show up, we will have this backup and we will get people into those seats or into those hotel beds and we will make double money. But obviously sometimes that can go wrong, and also it relies on models that have a lot of knowledge about the past interactions. So we need to know what the probability of a no-show is. So a no-show is a customer not to show up and not to cancel. If the customer cancels on time, obviously the customer might get 50% back or 75% or only 20% or maybe even nothing, but then the business has a few days left to fill that empty vacancy. So overbooking works in that kind of manner. It's very typical in airlines because airline tickets are very expensive and highly sought after. Hotels usually have a lot of beds and usually have open beds, free concerts can do this as well, but again, there's a lot of space where people can stand, so it's a different kind of game, and therefore not so often used. Rental cars do this a lot as well. However, that both with airline and rental cars is also connected with dynamic pricing. So that's not something we're going to talk about here, but also an optimization strategy in which the price of a ticket increases the less tickets are left. So there's different strategies can move together, but this one is pretty straightforward. We're just going to assume an airline, and for this airline, we're going to assume that there's a certain amount of no-shows for which we overbooked. So what's a good number for overbooking? What's a bad number for overbooking? Keeping all these constraints in mind. The impact of cancellation fee is obviously important to keep in mind. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we can overbook a plane, but then also make sure that the incentive for customers is pretty high to assist in that process. So that sounds a little bit odd, but the real part here is that if a business overbooks a plane, and let's say overbooks by 10 people, and they all show up at the gate and then are assigned to what we know as the standby list. However, they have a valid reservation, but they do not have a seat yet. Then the airline can obviously say, okay, we can't clear the standby list. We're going to bump you on the next plane. Problematic is, and that's what you will see here in the negative impact, is if you don't have a standby list. So standby lists are typically reservations that don't have a seat yet. These are customers that didn't check in, or they were check in online, or they were told by the airline at the check-in desk they are on the standby list. So that's a terrible place to be in, but legally for the airline, a lot easier to manage, because maybe they had people coming in from their premium memberships. Maybe they had first class or business bookings, and then they had to move things around. But if you're on the standby list, typically that's not so much an overbooking scenario. It can be, but it's easier for an airline to remanage a standby list. The real problem happens if there are more customers that are actually assigned a seat. So basically they really bought a ticket, they assign a seat, and they have the assigned seat, they checked in online, and they get on the plane, and then the airline tells them to move because they deem that someone else more important should have your seat, which again could be a premium customer, which again could be somebody who is maybe in a position that requires them to have a seat, and then the airline decides who they're going to take out of their seat. And this is what happened in this example in 2017 with United Airlines, where a man was basically physically dragged off a plane, even though he already had an assigned seat. So this crunch becomes pretty bad for airlines. The entire backlash was really bad. This is an example with United Airlines, and United Airlines had to pay an undisclosed sum to this individual based on the stress and mental health issues that ensued. But let's think about how we can create a model where this is a little bit mitigated. So maybe even the standby list can be cleared without having to move people around and giving them hotel rooms and all this kind of stuff, or whatever, depending on the country, is legally required. Also, this is all based on a model that doesn't know the legalities of the different countries. Europe, US, Asia, all different. They all have different regular or legal requirements around these no-show scenarios. Most countries allow no-shows or allow overbooking, but every country deals with it different and applies different thresholds to what the airline has to provide in these cases. In many cases, and this is kind of what we have to assume, and if you've ever been in that situation, you should move towards that amount. There is a cash reward. Typically, I think it's even higher, maybe 1,350, which is mentioned on the slide, but I heard of numbers that can go up to 1,800, plus the hotel, plus a rebooking on the next flight. So this is cash you get for free. You'll get food vouchers, you'll get a hotel voucher, you'll get a next flight, and maybe even upgrade to business class, so you can take cash home. So you basically get a free flight. Well, it's not really free. You paid the flight already, but you'll get this cash on top, which effectively which can make your flight look free. Often, though, vouchers are offered. So vouchers meaning instead of getting a cash reward, vouchers are offered. So that obviously is a choice where the customer can say, I'll take the voucher or I won't. Or I'll wait till the cash benefits come out. But every airline overbooks to a certain extent, and we want to understand obviously for how much the overbooking is. So these are the numbers of 2016, and these are the airlines that typically overbooked. Interesting is that you see the involuntary overbooking per 10,000 passengers. Involuntary is really this, that these people really want to get the plane, really want to get the flight, and the compensation, the negotiation of compensation has to shoot up significantly for the involuntary to be attended to. Voluntary denied boarding is very easy. You know, somebody just like at $300 kind of drops out and says, okay, I'm fine, I'm going to pay that. The involuntary is really the problem, and this is where it legally also bites. But you look at the numbers at the side; those are interesting numbers. Involuntary per passenger. And there's really those cheap airlines, JetBlue Express, SkyWest, Southwestern, they have a lot of involuntary. Obviously, they most likely also are not pulling out the big cash book, such as what Delta or Virgin Airlines might be doing. And then obviously the involuntary drops because they are putting out the thousands of dollars straight up, and then people say, okay, I'll just go on the next flight. These are more recent numbers. These are numbers 2016 and 2017 again compared. So in this comparison, generally it can be said that the bumping is happening less. So bumping is basically that people are bumped onto the next flight with some kind of reward, with a legal reward or beneficial reward. Totally it's dropped. But these are again old numbers. It would be interesting to see newer numbers, which I couldn't see anywhere. So what you really want to do is you want to understand this overbooking. So let's say there's certain bids. Again, I'm providing a couple of links here on how this works. But let's say there's bids, and usually they don't go below $300. It starts at $300, and they're usually called out during people already boarding. And it's a little bit stressful for everyone because obviously it's emotional not to get a certain flight if there's maybe a family event or whatever. So what we want to look at is a so-called toy model or a simplified model for this case, for this overbooking case. And typically variables that go into this are pretty big. We're going to look at very simple variables. Basically, we're going to assume a certain probability for no-shows, but every airline has their own witchcraft, their own knowledge to create those probabilities for no-shows, because it depends on the connection, it depends on the hub, it depends on the airline, it depends on the season, it depends if there is a certain sport event or maybe a concert at the destination. So there's a lot of stuff that would have to feed into a model to understand no-shows. So we can't just say there's a certain percentage of no-shows that is always the same. Airlines try their best to create this or to predict this no-show value, this probability, but it's pretty hard to predict that. Obviously, it also depends on the numbers of seats of the plane, the price of the seats, the likelihood that the seats will be bought or not, the type of flight, and so forth. So there's a lot going into this model, but the key of this model, and that's something we just have to assume, is a percentage for that certain flight, the percentage of no-shows for that certain flight. And that's an historic figure, but it can also be seasonal and it can be influenced by many more things. So we're going to simplify this model. We're just going to assume that each seat costs the same price. So no dynamic pricing. That's always a big deal as well. You might have a person that paid $200 for the ticket, another person paid $1,000 for the ticket. And obviously then there's a different scenario of who will quicker volunteer their ticket. The one who only paid $200 because they booked it really early might volunteer their ticket already for $500. The person that bought their ticket for $1,000 will definitely not volunteer their ticket for $500. So those things that usually have to go into the model. We're assuming that all seats are sold out. So none of these standbys, late online check-ins and so forth. We're assuming that all seats are checked in. So we have a completely overbooked plane. And we have people that have to leave, people that might have a family event, maybe a funeral, a wedding, or might be a premium customer and so forth. So we have a plane at full capacity and more people want to board but cannot because there's already people sitting in those seats. So how we calculate this, we have a simple assumption. So revenue is prices multiplied by tickets sold. And that's pretty easy for an airline. If we have 800 seats, we make 800 times 1,000 per ticket. So we would make 800,000 on that plane. That would be just basically straight out it. But the problem is that we can't we can't just stop there. That's not really the problem. But as a optimization expert in that field of strategy or business optimization, we can see that we might be able to make more money. So if the plane takes off and the stewardess and the captain kind of notice that every time this plane takes off, there's about 10 seats free of those 800. Then obviously the thought is there, okay, we could make another $8,000 because we could take all the money that we take anyway because we sold everything, but we could add another 8 seats, the revenue of 8 seats. So what we have here is an overbooking cost. So we have the cost, the revenue we can make, but what's the overbooking cost? So the overbooking cost is obviously the cost of removal. The cost of removal is pretty dynamic, so we never really know what that is. That could be offering people $500, $1,000. That could be paying some kind of legal compensation. But typically, if it's maxed out, it ends up on a cash reward of around $1,350. Again, those are in different states and in different countries. There's different caps, there's different directions this goes. But that's a pretty healthy value, and it's pretty good if that's cashed out. Usually people say, okay, that's fine. If you pay me the hotel and put me on the next flight, I'll take that cash. So we have cost of removal multiplied by the overbooked seats and the numbers of no-shows. So this is really where we where we calculate what the cost of the overbooking is. So if we have no-shows, then obviously the cost of overbooking will be pretty high, and the more no-shows we have subtracted by overbooking can potentially go to zero as well. So if we end up having zero in the brackets, then the cost of removal is multiplied with zero, and we have no cost of overbooking. So if there's more no-shows than overbooked seats, then this equation goes negative and we have a winner. So the number of no-shows multiplied by the price multiplied by refund rate is the cost of refunds. So obviously there's also a refund. That's something to consider as well. That some tickets, especially if they were bought on a very expensive price, they have refunds all the way to the end. So we don't know what's going to happen at the end. Someone might click cancel just half an hour before the flight is due to check in. So we look at this very complicated looking equation, but it's not that complicated. So we have price times tickets sold. So that gives us our revenue for that plane, minus the cost for overbooking, minus the cost of the refunds. And that gives us the total revenue of the plane. We can optimize on price. That's a different story, obviously, with dynamic pricing. There's a lot of optimization happening there. We can optimize not really on the amount of tickets sold if the plane is booked out. So if the plane is booked out, we can't sell more tickets no matter how good we're as a seller. But we can do this trick of overbooking, and we can say, okay, maybe there's a certain amount of no-shows, so we can work with this. But however, sometimes our equation doesn't work, and we have too many people that show up, so we will have a cost of overbooking. And if people click cancel early enough, we will have a cost of refunds. So we create a model, and the idea of this model is, without going too much into detail, and if you need a refresher in statistics, it's really not that hard to understand. What this really does is this calculation really just requires a binomial distribution. So the distribution is pretty much straightforward because we're multiplying each success event. So success event is that we can sell additional tickets, so we're overbooking the plane, times the probability of a no-show. So, and we add this up over the amount of tickets we've sold. So we're trying to basically calculate via the binomial distribution how much money can we actually make in addition. So if we look at this distribution, this binomial distribution here, we would typically have a record of no-shows. So we would have the black line, which is the probability of no-shows on that certain line, and we can say, okay, the highest amount of no-shows is around 12, and it kind of sieves off at around 24. So there's a certain probability there where statistically looking into the past, we can say how many no-shows will appear on that line, and then we can see how our revenue behaves. And this would be a typical visualization for a optimization, because we can figure out what is the max no-show that we will be working with and how much more money can we make if we put people into those seats for statistically what we believe the no-shows will be. So that's basically what this example describes. And what we really want to do is we want to increase these amounts of, we want to make sure we can add people into seats that are based on our no-show level. So that's really what we want to do, and it's pretty straightforward. And I'm going to use slides by a YouTube channel which I recommend you like and subscribe and do whatever you have to do. Here's the YouTube link to the video, and here's also the GitHub link to a Excel sheet that does the calculations by the handle is QVisible, very easy to find on YouTube. So basically what they do is they provide an example where a ticket cost is $50, the cost for overbooking is $90, so that's the cost for giving them a new flight, a hotel, food expenses, and so forth. The probability of no-shows is on the right-hand side. It's in yellow. I can see that now. That's a little bit hard to read, but I think you can. And refunds are 100%, so that doesn't really complicate our model. So if we have 0 no-shows, the probability for the plane just being full and nobody kind of and not somebody just kind of not showing up is very, very low, is 7%. And you can see it then increases 0.7%, and then you can see that there's a couple of no-shows, and the no-shows kind of max out at 2 to 3 no-shows in this kind of example. And these probabilities are provided by the airline based on historical data. And this is the table, and again, you can download this table from this YouTube channel, from their GitHub channel, and it's pretty easy now to calculate this. So what's the average cost of this? So we can work with this table as an optimization example. So we have on the left hand side, we have the no-shows from 0 to 9, and we have the no-show probabilities. And then based on these examples in terms of money, we can make money. We can actually say, okay, if we have 0 no-shows and we had 0 overbookings, then we have the first 0 in this upper left corner. Now, if we have 0 no-shows and we overbook by 1 ticket, then we have 90 overbooking costs. If we have 0 no-shows and we overbooked by 2 tickets, then we have 180 overbooking costs. And this is basically what we want to do. We want to fill this table. So we want to fill this table with the cost benefit, so to say. And if we have it the other way around, we can say, okay, if we have 1 no-show and we sold 2 extra, if we have 1 no-show and we sold an extra ticket, then we will make $50. If we have 2 no-shows, we will make $100. 3 no-shows, we make $150, and so forth. So we can basically use this table to calculate the average costs. So calculate the average cost is to take this additional money we would be making, but multiply it each with the probability, because obviously we don't know if we're going to make this money. The money has a certain probability attached to it, so the amount of no-shows to appear. So based on the binomial distribution in this case, we have to multiply all these values and add them up, and at the end we get an average cost value of 152 for this one, 111 for this one, 98 for this one, and so forth. And the lowest cost value here, so the lowest risk, is basically having an overbook scenario of 2 tickets. So basically we sell 2 more tickets, and that will allow us to get the highest revenue in this example. And there's an example video provided, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to comment. Thank you very much.